Today I'm going to show you some really cool things that you can do with watercolor that's more than just the normal wet paint on dry paper. So what you're going to need is a palette of watercolor, a brush, a cup of water, a towel to wipe your paintbrush on, and then each table should have a cup of salt, a little cup of rubbing alcohol, some saran wrap, and some tissue and X-Acto knife. So make sure you have all of those things before you get started. They should be on a tray ready for you before you even come in. But if not, you should know where they are. So I'm going to get started by showing you first just the normal way that most people paint, and that is wet paint on dry paper. So it's going to be your top square. So I'm just going to take my brush really wet. I'm going to dip it in the paint and stir it around a little bit, and then just paint directly on the paper. I didn't do any surface treatment to the paper before, just filling this in. Now you can rinse your brush off and get another color if you wanted to do a little blending. When you paint wet on dry like this, typically your paint stays where it is unless you put two colors beside each other. If you put two colors right beside each other, they might start to blend together, but typically it just stays put. So go ahead and try it, pause the video, and try it out for yourself. The next one we're going to do is wet on wet, and that is exactly what it sounds like. So we're going to get the paper wet with water. So if you're doing this one, you're going to work in small sections. You're going to get our paper wet, and then we're going to take color and paint right on top of the wet paper. And you can see it kind of goes everywhere when you do that. You have no control over where the color ends up. So I'm going to use the same color so you can kind of see the difference. Our next one is kind of the opposite of both of these, and that is dry brush. So what you're going to do is clean your paintbrush off, and then take your towel and get as much of the liquid off as you can. Get in your paint. Try to use one that already has color on it, and then again get as much paint off as you can, and brush. So see how it's kind of skippy? It's like it's skipping over the tooth of the paper. So I'm going to get as much off as I can. If it doesn't work out the first time, then let it dry and come back to it later, do a layer on top and see if you can get it. Try to get this dry brush look, because you can get a lot of really cool kind of effects with the dry brush. Okay, so for the next one, we're going to use salt, but first we're going to just take paint. You can either do it on wet or wet on dry, as long as your paper is pretty wet. So I have my salt, and I'm going to maybe use green this time. I'm going to get some pretty wet paint and load my paper up with paint. Make sure it stays wet, and then just take a little handful of salt, a little pinch, and pinch it right on. Salt is hygroscopic. So what that means is it's going to absorb all of the water around it. So you can already see how the salt crystals are getting dark. It's absorbing all of the water and therefore all of the paint around it. When this dries, you'll be able to kind of pick those salt crystals off, and it'll leave those little circles where the salt is. It kind of looks like snowflakes. For our next one, we're going to do plastic wrap. See, maybe I'll do all purple for that one. I'm going to take my purple, I'm going to paint it, keep it pretty wet. And then take my plastic wrap and just crinkle it up. This is quite a bit of plastic wrap, you don't need that much. Crumble it up and then just set it on top and let it dry. Don't move it. Let it dry, and as it dries you can kind of see where the paint is starting to pool where the plastic is. That will stay just like that, just like with the salt water or with the salt on the water. So once it dries, you'll be able to take that off and it'll look kind of like a diamond or like crystals. For this last one in this row, we're going to do scratching. So remember when we did the paper mache sculptures and we scored the cardboard if we wanted to bend it but not go all the way through? So you're going to score the paper. I want you to try it 2 different ways. I want you to try scoring before you paint. So you're not cutting in order to go all the way through the paper. You're just kind of cutting the surface. So score the paper first and then do a little bit of painting. So that's what I wanted you to do on the bottom. On the top, I want you to score after you paint so you can kind of see the different look you're getting. I think when you score after you paint, it gets a little bit brighter. So it depends on what kind of look you're going for. Do you want it to look like dark or do you want it to be kind of light? If you want it to be dark, this is a cool effect that you can get to give like shading, hatching, to add value to something. The next row we have gradiated wash. For our next one, we're going to do a gradiated wash. That one is a little bit harder to get the handle of. So again, if you can't get the handle of it, then you can practice later on a different piece of paper. So I'm going to start off by getting the whole area wet. And then I'm going to pick a color and load my brush up with it. Maybe not green because green is right on top. I'm just going to draw a line straight across the top. I'm going to clean my brush off, get most of the water off. I'm going to try to pull it down from the top evenly. So it kind of gives you a gradient or ombre depending on what term you want to use. So see, it's dark at the top and it gets lighter at the bottom. Variegated wash is a little bit different. So that one is going to be wet on wet. So you're going to get the whole paper wet. And then you're just going to drop little drops of color on it. And it spreads out like tie-dye. Now when you're doing this one, be very careful not to use complementary colors because it'll all just turn to mud. And be careful to not go overboard. It'll keep blending after you're finished with it. So don't keep adding colors. So like this, at the end, you're not going to see any of these white spots. It's going to all blend together. And then the last one in this row is lifting, so we're just going to paint like normal.
Mr. Hobby, call 2500, please.
Sorry about that. And then you're going to use a tissue Alright, in this next one we're going to take paint and just paint like normal. And then clean your paintbrush off completely. Don't let any paint be on there. And get most of the water off too. And you're going to dip your paintbrush in the rubbing alcohol. And you're just going to kind of let the rubbing alcohol fall. And it creates these little orbs. So the water is being repelled by the rubbing alcohol, so it creates these little orbs that look really cool. I think they look kind of like cells if you look at cells up close. So then clean your paintbrush off really well after that because you don't want to continue to paint with rubbing alcohol. And for this next one, you're going to get a little bubble of paint. So you're going to get paint and put it on. And then you got to get straight down onto it and with a straw and blow. You can do a lot of different colors. And get some really cool designs. This one, you can't really control where it goes. You can direct the paint, but outside of directing it to a certain direction, you can't tell it whether to spray to the go up more, go down. You can't really tell it what to do. Okay. And then the last one is splatter paint, and you've all done splatter paint before, I'm sure. And that is where you just take color, load up on your paintbrush, What I typically do is hide the other areas so it's not going to get ruined by the splatter. Protecting your table is also a good idea. And then just taking your paintbrush and hitting it on your finger so the paint kind of splatters off. Again, no control over where things are going. And also, again, you can layer colors, you can do all kinds of fun stuff with splatter paint. What I don't want to see is this. I don't want to see you flinging the paint, because what you're going to do if you fling it, you're going to get everything wet with paint except for the paper that you're trying to get. So now you should have this paper completely done. So what I want you to do is go put it on the drying rack, and then it should be about time for you to clean up so you can get packed up and get ready to go.